This episode is brought to you by Zencastr. Zencastr is the #1 tool for all podcasters. You can record high-fidelity audio between remote locations and get studio-quality sound. Go to Zencastr.com and use coupon code THATENTERTAINS for 20% off for 3 months or 20% off an annual plan.
This is a That's Entertainment podcast.
Awesome.
Just tell people they're awesome and mean it.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Did you have an awesome time? Did you drink awesome shooters and listen to awesome music and then just sit around and soak up each other's awesomeness?
Awesome. That was awesome. You guys are awesome.
No,
You're awesome.
no.
You are awesome.
Sir, you are awesome. Seriously.
Awesome. Awesome. Awesome.
Everything is awesome.
Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Jeff Richardson, aka El Jefe Tacoma, coming to you live from Mailman Studios in sunny Tacoma. And you're listening to Everything is Awesome, the show that celebrates all the best this universe can offer. KC Kaos.
What's up, Jeffrey?
How you doing, girl?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Pretty good. We're already smack dab in the middle of the show, so I'll throw it back to you.
We had a nice warm-up with Kev. Nerdy Kev.
What's up, Kev?
And a bit of a trick right there. That was our guest this week for Everything is Awesome, Jeff and KC from the other Everything is Awesome podcast. That's right, it's finally happened. We'll get to more of that in just a second here. I'm still trying to figure out my schedule and get everything straight for the Patreon. But good news, if you're listening to this now, that means that you can also go to patreon.com/thatentertains and listen to part 2 of my conversation with the other Everything is Awesome podcast right now. Just go to patreon.com/thatentertains to subscribe for as little as $2. If you want the early access, I believe that's $5 a month. And you also get a bunch of exclusives, like this week we'll be dropping 2 Patreon exclusives. We'll be dropping from Everything is Awesome, our Building a Better Kev series, where I sit down and talk about my weight loss journey. It's going to be the introduction to that series. Even if I can't edit it on my phone, I've been having issues recording it and getting it edited on my phone and processed there. I'll just have to upload it to the computer and do it the old-fashioned way. We also have Victims and Villains, who is doing a Daria recap that you can listen to this week on the Patreon, patreon.com/thatentertains. And the end of the week, we'll be also dropping something for Black Squadron Radio, which is not an active show on the network yet, but it will be hopefully next month sometime. So we'll also be dropping some stuff related to that. And I have big news. We are launching on October 1st, I believe, After Party of One. It is the new podcast, kind of think Talking Dead, but for role-playing games. We're going to be sitting down and going over the month's worth of Party of One podcast episodes that dropped in September. So we'll be recording that near the end of September. I'm finalizing the guest for our pilot episode, but we'll be talking about every single episode of Party of One that drops in the month of September. And it will be dropping on to Patreon on probably September 29th or September 30th. And that'll be made available to the entire public on the 1st of October. It's going to be a monthly podcast hosted by me, where I sit down and talk to either a guest from that month, the host of the show, Jeff Stormer, or just someone that's in the tabletop community. And that could be literally anyone, whether you are a player, a dungeon master, game master, or just a fan of the series of Party of One or role-playing games in general. You can come sit on the show and chat. And if you want to be part of that, please email me at, I don't know the podcast email off the top of my head. So email me at awesome@crewnumerstudios.com with the subject line After Party of One if you're interested in being a guest on that show. Without further ado, let's just get right to this week's episode. We sat down with Jeff and KC Kaos from the other Everything is Awesome podcast, and we discovered throughout our conversation a lot of similarities between the two shows, and I believe that basically we're doing their show's a little bit more structured, but for the most part we have a very similar vibe. We're all very positive and just kind of looking to better the world and the universe and stuff. What's even crazier, all of the similarities that we bring up in both part 1 and part 2 here of the conversation I had with the other Everything is Awesome podcast hosts, Jeff and KC. We mentioned a lot of similarities. The one that we didn't mention is Jeff has a Kaos in his life, KC Kaos. And what's crazier yet is she spells it Kaos. And for those of you that know, my best friend in the world, Mike D'Angelo, used to wrestle as Kaos, Kaos. He wrote a book series that featured a character named Kaos, Kaos, modeled after himself. It's crazy. It is crazy that two podcasts with basically the same name have so many similarities, and I'm so happy that we finally made this happen. So, without further ado, here is my conversation with the hosts of Everything is Awesome with Jeff and KC on Awesome-podcast.com, part of the That's Entertainment Podcast Network on thatentertains.com/network.
Yeah, this has been a long time coming. What's it, like 3 years, 4 years?
2.5 years of me publishing this show. I started publishing February 1st of 2016. But I started recording in October of 2015. And it's funny because I was actually just talking to my fiance a couple hours ago, explaining the interview, because like she doesn't listen to the show at all. But I was like, yeah, there's this other podcast, Everything is Awesome. And she's like, wait, what? I was like, all right, well, here's the story. As
she must not look at your Twitter.
No. And so this is like the my side of the story of finding out about Everything is Awesome. I don't know which one's 2.0 at this point, but I've been podcasting since July of 2007, and I've done various shows in that 11 years. But I did take some time off in like 2012, like the summer 2012, after my son was a couple months old. I just stopped podcasting because like I was a new parent and I had no idea what to do. And it took a couple of years to get back into it. And I said to myself, all right, well, I don't want to do a show that relies on a co-host because like it's already hard enough to get me to do the show with my crazy schedule, because baby. And so I wanted to do an interview show because then I would just have to rely on myself. But I'm a terrible interviewer. Like like the fact that I do an interview show is a joke because I want to say I guess it was probably episode, it was somewhere in the 70s, I think. I did like a 10-year anniversary of me podcasting show. And I believe I threw the clip in of my first ever interview I did back in 2007. And it's just awful. Like and something I usually explain to my guests ahead of time, and which I don't think I did with you guys because I was doing I was like really swamped with the Philadelphia Podcast Festival stuff and going crazy like the end of June, which is why I think we had miscommunication about tonight. Totally my fault. I apologize for that.
No problem. Not at all.
But my interviews, like if I prepare for an interview, I have questions and then I say, I asked question 1, you answer it, probably tee me off for a really great follow-up. And I say, that's great. Let's go to question 2. And like, I'm just awful. So I do, and my fiance tonight was like, I think it's like not respectful the way you do interviews because I don't prepare. Like I don't do a pre-interview. I don't do any kind of thorough research. I go into it blind to have like a natural conversation.
That's what I do too.
That's what we do.
God,
Dude, it's freaky how many similarities.
Except I don't think it's awful.
Okay, so my podcast heroes in the beginning were Mark Maron.
Okay.
And Aisha Tyler.
Okay.
Both of whom go into it cold like that. I mean, sometimes they know the person, so they do that or whatever. But like I find it's just a fresher experience
Yes.
if you don't know everything
So
about
do you
the
say
person.
it's awful because you're uncomfortable or you just feel awkward?
No. I think the way I do it is great. I think not doing research is great, and it makes me a better. I think long form interview, the way this show is usually described, is the wrong description. It's more long form conversation,
Right.
Because oftentimes, well, like a common theme of train going off the rails is it's like pop culture, like whatever the hot movie is, or if there's a common ground of like Marvel or DC or Star Wars or something like that, if something triggers us to go off the beaten path, is usually what will happen on this show. So it very much is more of a conversational show than it is an interview show. But that's because I don't do any prep. So I don't think it's awful that I don't prep. I think it's great. I have my podcasting heroes, especially when I decided to do this show, I was thinking of like people that do something similar, and it was Kevin Smith with Fat Man on Batman, the original version of that, at least. Aisha Tyler as well. I'm a huge fan of her Girl on Guy show, and Aaron McGathy with This Feels Terrible. Like they all three of them do, or at one point did, a similar show to what I was kind of going for. And so yeah, that's how I developed this show, was like, I want to talk to other podcasters. And then when I didn't know, I don't know how long have you guys been podcasting?
I'm Casey, by the way.
Okay.
Hi, Kevin.
That's KC Kaos. What's up?
I've been podcasting for as long as Jeff and I've been dating, so about 2 years now.
Okay.
Yeah, we got together.
I'm bad with time.
We got together right around Valentine's Day of 2016. I guess shortly after you started this podcast, or at least kicked it off full time. And a month or two in, I was like, hey, I'm going down to see this 16-year-old comedian in Olympia. You're welcome to tag along. I could bring an extra mic if you want to get in on it. And she hopped in. We're sitting in this kid's kitchen with his dad's like around the corner. And all of a sudden she's got this amazing radio voice and insight and all this stuff. It was really cool.
We had some podcast magic.
With that passion.
But Jeff's been doing it longer.
Yeah. So when I got started, it was, let's see. I mean, I've wanted to do it ever since I heard one, when I first heard TBTL in 2012.
Okay.
But it took me a while to find somebody to produce. So I think it was late 2013. Yeah, it was like September 2013, I think, or maybe. No, it was 2014. That's what it was. Yeah. And I got in touch with a lady who worked at a radio station. Her name is Melissa Suter. She worked at the Evergreen State College radio station called, coincidentally, Chaos Radio.
Yeah.
And
spelled the same too.
Yeah, we got all kinds of synchronicities in our lives over here. But so me and Melissa started the show, and it was going to be really heavily focused on local art and music, because she had the radio background. She knew all these local musicians and people that come in and out, and we had access to the studio there at Evergreen. And then her mom got cancer, and she decided to go back to Baltimore and stay with her mom for a while, take care of her. And so my show basically transitioned almost overnight into essentially the show you were creating. And they just happened to have the same name. So it was like really odd. Like once I realized that you had started putting out episodes under that name, and I'm over here like doing exactly what you're doing. Like it was, I didn't know what to do. I was like, I'm enjoying this so much. I'm loving interviewing all these people. But I'm also like, I feel like I'm biting this guy's rhyme over here.
Yeah, I was like,
I didn't know what to do.
I'm like, copyright, what's going to happen? And so like we changed our Facebook to Everything is Awesome Podcast, and then added, with Jeff and Casey.
Yeah, when Casey showed up, she understands marketing and promo. And
yeah, I was just like, oh, this is a nightmare, because maybe 1 or 2 episodes for me, and I did like a Google search, and that popped up, like your page popped up, but it's through That's Entertainment.
Yeah.
And I think at that point must have been your it must have been like your lull in producing. So I was like, oh, like maybe this guy won't pick it up again. And like, like like maybe he just got bored or whatever and like won't produce anymore. And like, I didn't understand like how the website worked, and like you weren't like uniform in that you were only Everything Is Awesome. Like you were under another, like, it seems like a network umbrella.
Yeah.
So I was just kind of like, like, okay, maybe I'll just like let it go. And then we started getting tagged on Facebook from your guests.
Oh my God, tweets. People were thanking us for having them on. And I'm like, wait, I think that's Nerdy Kev. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So like in the middle of the day, we'd get like people tagging our podcast, and we're both, linked on it on our Facebooks. And I'm like, all excited. I'm like, but who is this person? And they were trying to tag your Facebook.
It's funny. Okay, so I want to rewind back to when I was developing this show. What ended up being my version of Everything Is Awesome, and originally, like, the name was going to be very podcast centric because that's what I wanted to do. But like, 10 years ago when I started podcasting, the community wasn't friendly at all, and I mean, really, because there wasn't a podcasting community, an indie community.
Have you watched Earbuds or what's that?
Earbuds, the podcasting documentary?
No. I think I've heard of it before.
You should check it out.
Yeah. Hold on. I have a little creep coming into my studio here. What's up, bud? You need me to give Teddy a hug? All right.
Aww.
All right. Good night, bud. Love you.
Aww.
And actually, that was my son Trey. And
yeah, I was like, that must be the son that you took the break for.
Yep. And he's 6.5 now, and he actually, when like right before we started doing this, like, he was old enough to like kind of understand like what a microphone was, and so in my shed I had all my old equipment, like all my mixers and stuff, so like he kind of helped me get back into it and start developing it again, because he was like, he wanted to record. So we there's a couple episodes that like him and I have done that I don't even know if I have posted yet. Like, it's just we did it for us. But yeah, he actually, he got me back into it, and he still loves the idea of podcasting and is waiting for me to finish my studio so that he can go back out there and like just record whenever he wants. Anyway, so when I decided that podcasting I thought was too much of a niche like setting for me, I was like, all right, well, I'll open it up to everything. Hey, Everything Is Awesome. And it was like right around when the Lego movie came out and whatnot. And I swear to you guys, I Googled, like, when I develop podcasts, I am very big on making sure there's no one else with that name. So I Googled.
That makes one of us.
I Googled the crap out of Everything Is Awesome, Everything Is Awesome podcast. I looked on iTunes. I looked in Stitcher. I looked in all these services, and nothing popped. Like, and maybe I'm definitely better at like doing that research now than I was even 3 years ago. But nothing pops up, and I don't know if you were doing Everything Is Awesome by that name in October 2015, maybe summer 2015. If not, then I'm definitely in the clear, because
we didn't have a website. Okay. We barely did anything on Facebook. I mean, because the reason why I waited forever to start was I wanted a producer who knows how to do all this stuff.
Yeah.
And Melissa was that person, but after episode 5, she was gone. So I was just like floating in the wind, making my little interview show. I had no idea what was going on.
And then I started posting February 1st. I should know this a little bit better, but I'm almost positive February 1st, 2016 is the episode 1 of Everything Is Awesome. And I want to say that within like a month, I saw that you guys were around too. I was like, you got to be kidding me! How is this? And like, I saw that you guys had a bigger library than me, and I was like, huh?
We had like 45 episodes.
I think that's why I was like, well, we have more episodes, so we're good. I'm not too worried. This guy will fade out. And then no, you got a logo, you start producing, where I was like, oh.
And every week it was like, oh man, we're doing fewer and he's doing more. What are we going to do?
Well, and that's what I was like, after a month, I was like, I'm I was like, I'm committed because like I think like after like when I realized that I had already commissioned like the new logo, because my original logo was like a real crappy thing that I did on myself that like incorporated like elements of the song from the Lego movie and whatnot.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
And then I paid someone to develop the logo that I have now, and I was like,
oh, you're in for a pound right
I
there.
I just spent $100 on this. Like, I was like, they do have with Jeff and KC on it. So I was like, I guess we're different enough. Like, whatever. And honestly, that's just been that like ever since. And like, and I always wanted to contact you guys to be on the show because to me, like, it's funny. It's a funny coincidence, and I've always thought about tagging up my show because if you Google Everything Is Awesome, like we neither of us come up. Like Everything Is Awesome, it's all Lego movie stuff that comes up. But if you throw in Everything Is Awesome podcast, then it's a mix between both of our stuff that pops up.
Oh, cool. Yeah. I wonder if maybe it was just like SEO stuff since you're in a different state.
Maybe.
And like when you're searching.
Well, and you probably had like fans built in. Nobody knew who I was. So that's probably why I was like way under the radar.
Yeah, and I'm a big thinker, so I'm like I'm doing what you did when you started the podcast after the podcast has already started, and I'm like, oh man, there's another podcast. Like, how is this gonna work copyright wise? Like brand identity and all this stuff. I'm like, what?
Yeah, so since she added our names to the thing, now I just tell people, just look Jeff ampersand Casey, you'll find us because it's so much easier.
And when I tell people to like look for the show, I'm like, just look for the one with the yellow background, like that's me, because like that's like the clear cut difference is
Casey.
Actually, we do have a yellow background. I did make one.
But it took a while for me to like finally just say like, hey, let me contact these guys to be on the show. And what really kind of did it is around this past New Year's, I got tagged in a tweet from the show. It's
good luck.
Yeah, and saying thanks for doing the guest spot on this New Year's episode, and I was like, oh man, I must have been super drunk because I don't remember this. and like it got blown off. He said something. I was like, all right, cool. I guess I don't know. Clearly not me. And I didn't even think to be like, maybe it was the other Everything Is Awesome guys. And then like a couple weeks later, I get tagged again from him. I'm like, so I DM him. I was like, hey man, it's not me. Like I did the research. I'm like, I definitely like, I know I have a bad memory and sometimes I do things without remembering, but like, I definitely wasn't on your show. And like, I listened. I listened, and in the end, you thanked Jeff from Everything Is Awesome. And like this is where it's totally my fault in branding. Like I started a show called Everything Is Awesome. That's not him. And I was like, my name's Kev, like not Jeff. And he's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And then he's like, you'll be a guest on the show. So I ended up doing a spot on the show as well, down the road. I forget. Yeah, I forget what episode, but yeah, it was like my first like voice acting gig and whatnot, and that's how like I got that. It was like so I've only ever been confused with you guys one time, and I don't know what it is because like we both, because I want to say you have like the better handle, like you for Twitter, because you guys have the handle that I wanted.
EiAPodcast. Yep. That was about the only good idea I ever had.
and only because the other good handle is at Awesome-ception, and somebody else has that.
Yeah, there's like a sort of awesome podcast out there, I think.
Well, I don't think they do anything anymore. Like how to be awesome.
That happens a lot. Yeah.
So how to be.
Well, as long as we're like through the origin of our battle, why don't we talk about why? Because I didn't actually choose. Do you want to do your intro
anytime soon?
Oh yeah, we'll do a full crossover. Okay. Do you have a fun intro or anything you put on your eps? Or do you do that later?
Yeah, so I used to, when I first started out, and my thing is now every February 1st or right around that anniversary, I changed my show up a little bit. So I used to do like a Kevin Smith-esque intro where I would sit down and wax poetic about my guest in front of them for like 5 minutes. But it got to the point where I was also doing a 5-minute pre-intro to that. And I was like, I can't, my listeners are going to hate me for talking
Too many intros.
So now, like, in post-production, I'll go and I'll throw in, the theme song, and I'll do a proper intro to explain that, hey, by the way, like, we're talking to the other Everything is Awesome podcast, and yeah, so my intro will be much later when this airs.
Okay, so you'll just be like, we're talking via transdimensional gateway.
Yeah, exactly. And then
my evil twins.
And it is, that was like, so this is why I think I didn't find you the first time, is I looked at Awesome Podcast on Twitter. Like, that, I think 3 years ago sounds about right, when I would just look at Twitter to make sure there was no other podcast.
And you just weren't counting on me being a Twitter jackass neophyte.
And so because I must have just looked at Awesome Podcast, and then I said, well, screw it, I'll be Real Awesome Pod, and because they didn't do anything since 2014, this podcast. So and had I done the simple research of just typing in Everything is Awesome instead of at Awesome Podcast, I obviously would have found at EiAPodcast, where you have been joined since 2014 as well. So you guys clearly have existed longer.
Yes.
So basically, when I first came up with the idea with Melissa, it was going to be like local, hyper, Northwest, talking to your friends and neighbors kind of thing.
And his is kind of like that in Philadelphia. Yours
you've
is
got
like
some of that vibe in
yeah.
Philadelphia.
Yeah.
But when it came down to sit down to talk about names, they all seemed too like businessy, or like it'd be about nature or some shit, because we're in the Northwest. And then her kid is like, everything is awesome. And we're like, okay, sure, why not? It was that well thought out.
Well, and so wait, do you predate the movie?
No, the movie had just come out, right? Yeah. Like 2013, 2014.
February 7th, 2014 is when Lego Movie came out. I just looked it up.
Yeah, I didn't even watch the movie until after starting the podcast.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was they'd probably just got it on their Kindle or whatever people do.
Yeah.
In 2014. I don't know. So Casey wanted me to do my cool intro, so you get to hear it. Here it goes. Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Jeff Richardson, a.k.a. El Jefe Tacoma, coming to you live from Mailman Studios in sunny Tacoma. And you're listening to Everything is Awesome, the show that celebrates all the best this universe can offer. KC Kaos.
What's up, Jeffrey?
How you doing, girl?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Pretty good. We're already smack dab in the middle of the show, so I'll throw it back to you.
We had a nice warm-up with Kev. Nerdy Kev.
Yes. What's up, Kev?
Great. So, I guess we should have, but before I hit record, we should have probably talked about this crossover and how we were going to do it. Because I totally envisioned just doing like a part 1, part 2 situation, but
ooh, we could do that.
Yeah.
We could do that. Or we could just produce it however we want to afterwards.
Yeah. Well, I'm 100%, I'm not going to even kick off an intro now. I'm going to use what you just said as my intro.
That's awesome. Do you have regular segments we could switch off?
No, I don't.
He does a thing on, so backstory, Nerdy Kev also has a podcast called Everything is Awesome. And you, for the part where it's the Everything is Awesome song, you splice together voices, I think?
Yeah, so my intro is a free YouTube song that I pulled, and then just a bunch of different clips from movies and stuff. Or there was a YouTube, I don't know, I found anything that I could find that had the word awesome in it, and for some of them I tried to think, I was like, oh, you know what, I know Robert Downey Jr. had to have said awesome in Iron Man at some point, so I scoured the internet for an awesome, Robert Downey Jr. saying awesome.
It sounds pretty cool, actually. Yeah,
that's
cool.
Usually the biggest compliment I get about my show is the intro. I have a friend that I met through interviewing on the show, Adam from After 6 O'Clock podcast, And he said like he'll often just like put on my podcast and put the intro on loop. And I don't know if he listens to the show after that, but he'll listen to the intro quite a few times. And it is like one of my favorite parts of the show. And I have a feeling that as my show progresses and I enter, you know, the third, or I guess we're in the third year, but as I enter the fourth year and we get to that anniversary in February of 2019, I might bring back the fact that I play the intro with my guest on the line, because I'm hoping like right now the way I record is always remote, and right now, like for me, Zencaster is like the best utility to use for that. And so I'm just using my Blue microphone Snowball for that, but
so you don't have a line in going into the Zencaster?
No, like right now I am in what would be called a toy room / my fiance sells LuLaRoe / LuLaRoe room.
So Amelia dresses.
Yes, I see Amelia's and Carly's next to me. I've been to leggings. I have elegant stuff and skirts in front of me. So I'm literally like, I don't even have like my soundproofing is LuLaRoe clothing.
Yeah. The LuLaRoe studio.
Yes,
studio.
It is the LuLaRoe studios in this room. But my actual studio that's torn apart right now is I lovingly call the shedio, because that is my shed in my backyard. I'm in the process of ripping it apart because it was literally a shed that I had a corner of for podcasting space. And I'm hanging drywall and I'm making it look nice, and I'm going to get some fancy stuff hung up, and I'm going to make it an actual studio and have my permanent setup with my mixer and stuff. So that I love the Blue Snowball. Like, I think it gets crystal clear quality. Like, I don't know if you guys, I mean, I assume you guys are you also do remote interviews as well, right?
Yeah. In the beginning, I wanted only in studio. Like, I feel like my interviews are better. Just, I don't know, there's some kind of energy or whatever. But then Casey would be like, I found this really cool person, but they're all the way across the country. We should interview him. And I'd be like, all right. So I figured out how to do it.
So we do Skype.
Yeah. And we did a great one with Greg Carlock.
He was also in a closet, in a closed closet. Yeah. We've had a couple.
Eric Anderson from Trouble with Trivia, who I just started a D&D adventure with on Discord. That's fun. We can talk about that.
Yeah, we'll get to that, because you mentioned something as I was like frantically trying to get set up for the interview. What a train!
Yeah, you had Jeff Stormer on.
Yeah, and Jeff's a good. Like, I actually just had beers with him today. It's Philadelphia, I think, is like such a tight market for podcasting. Like LA and New York get so much credit. James D'Amato believes Chicago has a better market than Philly, and we just kind of agreed to disagree on that when I had him on the show, because Philadelphia, to me, like, there's the factors I have are pretty simple. We're the only 100%. Well, I can't say 100% anymore, but for the most, like 95% free podcast festival out there. We also are the largest podcast festival out of all the markets, where we cover at least 2 weekends, if not days in between during the week. And the last 2 years have averaged 50 plus shows. So it's Philadelphia has a strong independent podcasting market that I'm really proud to be part of, and Jeff's part of it, and him and I are part of the same like class of podcasters. He started up a couple months before me, and his first festival was in 2016 as well. So him and I are like, we kind of grew close because of that, and
you guys are like the podcasting OGs, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's weird. I never even thought about it, but it's like how comedians talk about their generations.
Yeah.
Like Dave Anthony, Mark Maron, Jackie Cation. Like, it's you, me, Stormer, like all these people that started at 2012, 2013, 2014. Oh, wait, you're going all the way back to 07, though. Like,
he said he started.
I started in 07. I started, and I forget I guess I started recording in June, but as far as like internet tracing, because last year I had to go back and figure it out to like celebrate 10 years. The first earliest thing I could find was July 1st is when we posted episode 1 of Happy Hour with Steel Tip. That was my original show. I used to wrestle. WWE style wrestling, getting hit with chairs and all that fun stuff. And I went by the name Steel Tip. And I carried that.
You wore boots in the ring?
I did once in the backyard. So I started wrestling in the backyard, and I wore steel tip boots there. And we quickly realized that was a really bad idea. So my wrestling boots.
Somebody's brains came out, maybe.
Almost. But so I started buying black boots with silver tips on them. Like that's how I compensated for that name. And I played the character up as being the heel from Pittsburgh living in Philadelphia and whatnot. And at the time, Philadelphia was a garbage city when it came to championships and sports. So I was able to play that up real well. But in 2007, I had February of 2007, I broke my ankle. Not wrestling. It was a drinking incident. I just never really, I wrestled one time after that in like 2009, I wrestled. But I never got back into it. So like by the time the summer rolled around or spring or whatever, somehow like podcasting and me being involved came to life, and I started doing it under that steel tip persona. And it was really just an excuse to like buy all kinds of different beers and drink them on air. But in 2007, like there was no model. There was no like podcasting was very much in its infancy. And the very first.
Right. And that's probably where all that rivalry came from, was because it sounds like, just from watching Jeff's progression in podcasting, it seems like it was like radio people came over to podcasts, and so they tried to stake a claim, but then podcasting kind of has exploded. Yeah. Now, I mean, we have podcasts like in my school, like I go to the Evergreen State College, the Tacoma campus, and like everybody's doing podcasts, like it's just so much more accessible. But I would imagine like when in like the early 2000s that it was probably more territorial than that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So who was starting a podcast around that time, right? You mentioned Kevin Smith, you got WTF. Over here we had TBTL. Like who were your contemporaries at the time?
For me, the guy I listened to was Kevin Smith. Like I wasn't really like a big podcaster. Like if you, and I don't think you can find my original podcast online anywhere anymore. But if you were to go back and listen to those episodes, they were very much structured like a 2-hour radio program. Mm-hmm. That's where we pulled our inspiration from. And when I was a teenager, like I remember in Philly, YSP was the big rock station. Now it's a sports station, but back in the day, it was just a rock station that had Howard starting in the morning, and it had Kid Chris afternoons and stuff. And so I was, and I guess I was a fan of Howard. Like, my dad listened to him when I would be in the car with him as a kid, or at least as a teenager. Like, not like not a 6-year-old, but like, my dad understood I could handle Stern at some point. And I was a fan, but I was more of a Opie and Anthony guy in the afternoons, and then big into this guy Kid Chris, who I don't know if you guys have ever heard of him, but he was. Kid Chris he's still like, he had every opportunity to have a show on Howard stations, and he's the type of guy that would probably do well there because he's a little bit more shock jockey and stuff. And as a teenager and early 20s, that was kind of the vibe I had. Like I was that was who, and again back then in 2007 there was podcasting really felt like more of a radio show than it did anything, at least to me. Like even Smodcast in 2007 was 2 guys sitting around talking, which for all intents and purposes was a radio show to me. Mm-hmm.
That's for Casey. That's the Kevin Smith's more recent podcast, right?
That's his oldest podcast.
Oh, okay.
Smodcast. That's he started Smodcast with Scott Mosier in 2007 as well, in February of 2007. So when it came to podcasting, like really, I didn't have anyone I looked up to, except for Kevin Smith. I looked up to like Kid Chris and Howard Stern, and that's where we modeled our show after like local Philly radio. And our first episode actually was recorded with me being in Maine, my producer being in Philadelphia, and my co-host being in Levittown, which is a suburb of Philadelphia. So we had to figure out remote podcasting before it was a thing.
Yeah.
Like I don't know.
Do you guys use AOL?
We use now. There's some. I mean, controversy is probably the wrong word to use, but there's some disagreement with what we used back then. My old original producer says we used Skype, but I feel like Skype wasn't a thing back then.
Yeah.
So yeah, we were doing remote podcasting really kind of before remote podcasting was a thing. So he says Skype. I feel like Skype wasn't around in 07.
Yeah,
I feel like it
agree.
was. I don't know if they called it. It wasn't Google Hangouts. I think it was GChat had an audio.
Oh
thing.
yes. Yeah.
So I feel like that's what we used. And like again in 07, there was no fancy microphones like I have in front of me. At least nothing fancy that I wanted to pay for. So and
our phones weren't that smart.
Exactly.
Either.
Yeah. Like I don't think I had a smartphone in 07. I think I had a flip phone still. So I used like just like the Logitech headset that was maybe like $25. And I think that's what my co-host used. I think my producer, he had a computer to have, so he had his mixer, and this is kind of similar to like my in-studio setup because I have that old school mentality, but he had his mixer that had his computer set up for recording, and then he had a computer to patch me in through GChat, a computer to patch my co-host in through GChat, a computer to play intros and commercials and stuff, and then a computer to patch in a guest if we had a live call in that day. So
we had 5 different computers?
Yeah, 5, if not more. Like that's just me kind of remembering the basic setup.
Whoa. And you weren't the guy in charge of
so
all
I didn't
that.
know anything about podcasting back then. He went to school for like audio engineering. So I showed up.
So no wonder then it kind of matched the vibe of a radio show because it was building on a tradition.
Yeah, and he formatted the show. Like he's the one that said, here's like I literally I showed up and talked. Like I didn't do anything for.
Yep, that's me.
Oh man, it's kind of the ideal. Like I love editing and producing and stuff, but man, when I get to just be on somebody's show, it's so fun.
Yeah, just show up.
Well, and now here's my secret to kind of living that kind of life as a host of a show too, is broadcast it live a few times, and then you'll realize there's really no reason to edit. Like. So one of the greatest experiences I had in my podcasting quote unquote career here is we eventually we had a falling out with Happy Hour Steel Tip. I went on and learned how to produce a show myself, and then eventually reconnected with that producer of mine because we realized we were just idiots who both had egos really. And he needed a co-host for his show, so like I was contracting 5 weeks at a time to be a co-host, and like it was like the only time I ever got paid to do podcasting was on this show called The Stabcast.
Nice.
And so I was doing his show and my show at the same time, and it eventually became a permanent thing that I was doing. And did you guys ever hear of a service called Stickcam?
Yeah, that's actually the podcast I love that I started on listening was TBTL, and they were on Stickcam for a while. And so that's how their Facebook page is now called the Stems page, because it started out as their Stickcam friends.
Well, that's like where I got my live broadcast experience was through that. And once I started doing the show that I was producing at the time was just simply called Happy Hour. I dropped the with steel tip part. So I was broadcasting it live, and I realized at that point I was like, well, like why do I need to edit it? Like if I say or then it's already been heard by 1,000 people, 10,000, like however many people listen to the show. Like all these people heard me stumble my way through this 2 hour, and eventually I tamed it down to an hour project. But they eventually like heard me just make an ass out of myself. So like, why do I need to fix that in post? So
Was it, can I ask, as a person that loves to hear my own voice, was it hard for you to go down from 2 hours to 1 hour?
Yes and no. Yes and no. We when I had a 2-hour show, again, it was kind of following that old way of doing podcasts that I was trained to do. And that meant having commercial breaks. So really that 2 hours was really maybe an hour and a half of me and my co-host, or me and my co-host and a guest talking, because we had about a half hour commercials in there. And with Stickcam, even between the Stabcast, which was the show I was contracted on, and my own show, like we had deals with Stickcam where we actually had to have those commercials in there. For revenue.
Oh, so the money was actually coming from Stickcam.
For the Stabcast, yes, there was money coming from that. For Happy Hour, I didn't have that a financial agreement with them. I just had a like feature me agreement with them, but I had to have breaks in there so that if they wanted to air commercials as well, they could. So, so we had to have commercials in there, and eventually when I tamed it down to an hour, I think I was still doing like a commercial here and there, but I was able to like not have them be as long. Like instead of being 5-minute breaks, they were like maybe 30 seconds to a minute long. So and as you guys can hear, even on my own show, I like to talk a lot. So.
Which makes our job really easy.
Yes. Oh man. Okay, let's dish.
Okay.
All right. I mean, Casey opened the door. Let's talk about disaster.
Okay.
Oh.
Nope, don't any names. You know who you are. No, but like seriously, when you have to like drag interesting out of someone.
Yeah, so I think I benefit from the sense of like I do all my own booking. And I generally book people that I think I know I'm gonna have a great conversation with. Like, for instance, I'll use you guys as an example. Like, there's no way we're not going to have a great conversation because we're doing the same show, like almost to the name. Like, so I tend to have always, I think, a good guest on. I can think of a couple that were bad because I booked them. Every now and then I'll book a guest through Fiverr. Have you guys heard of Fiverr?
Jim,
you could get freelancing work, or you could like hire people, but then you could also work on there to do freelancing.
Jim told me I should get on there and do voice acting or voiceover stuff. And as with our Patreon, it's one thing that's on my list.
Yeah, we're not lucrative in that sense.
Oh my god,
we haven't figured that out.
I'm right there with you. I've been trying to start my Patreon for a year now, and I'm
okay. Now I don't feel so bad.
I'm actually hoping that by the time this episode airs, it's actually live, because this is going to air sometime in August for my feed at least. And
nice. Well, I just want to tell you guys who are listening, you've come to expect really high quality programming from Nerdy Kev, and everything is awesome. And all he's asking is for you to just dig deep, get in there, get in your pocket, pull out maybe $5 a month. And he's got all kinds of great extras for you. Go ahead.
Now I have to own up to that. Now I have to develop these extras.
So you got on Fiverr?
Yeah, so I use Fiverr. Like every now and then, like I'll have people book a guest spot for, I think I have like a 10, I think I have like a $10, $20, and $40 like price level of like, this is how you can pay me money to be a guest on my show. It's I don't know why people do it. Like, if I'm being honest, like I have no idea why, but I will gladly do it because it usually brings in like an interesting thing that I was never going to book anyway. And it's like, it's earning some extra side cash that I can use to pay off hosting fees that cost, a lot of money at the end of the day.
That's a really good idea.
So that's cool. So, but it's usually people that like your show, right?
No, so usually they have no idea who I am. I have no idea who they are when it's through Fiverr. And if I'm being honest, I
would scare the hell out of me.
They are the toughest ones because and I do require people to like message me first before they book the gig, because like there's certain things I'm just not going to talk about on my show. Like, I'm not, if you're a Nazi, I don't want you on my show, like, at all. So
I want to see that message thread.
it's often that people will book ahead of time, and I'll email them like, hey, like I need to approve this first. And like, that's like Fiverr has this thing if you're a seller where like they knock you down a few pegs if you have to cancel orders. And I'm okay with that because like at the end of the day, it's more important that I have a feed that I believe in versus the money. Like I'd rather have a guest that I at least represents something that that I'm not against. So like again, like so I don't want, I just want hatred basically on my feed, like, and so there's not a lot that I'll turn down, but there's certain things. And like, I also am not, as we've discovered, like I'm not a great interviewer. So like someone that wants to come on and like promote like their business, it's like, like, I want to promote, like I had someone say they wanted to come on and promote their like business to help like sell, I don't know, like a binky. I don't know what it was. But like something stupid. I was like, guy, like I'm being honest with you. I don't want you to waste your money because I can't turn that into gold. Like nothing against me. Like I'm the problem.
That's not my fan base.
Yeah, I mean, there's one thing about going into an interview cold, knowing that person already has a presence and is interesting to people. But to go in having to do all the work, I mean, you'd have to do a bunch of extra research. That's not what the thing is.
And I don't do that. Like I tell them too, like I was like, I'm literally not going to like research it. And with other guests, like I will 100% hop on, I'll fully dive into their stuff, into their craft once I talk to them, because now I don't need to be surprised. With these people, I tell them like not only am I not going to research it, like I'm never going to think about it after I post it. Like unless you truly have something that interests me. And to any of my past Fiverr guests that are listening to this, it's like again, nothing against you. It was strictly a business deal that helped you promote something. So they are usually the tougher interviews that I have to do, where I have to like pull stuff out of people sometimes. I've had a couple that I booked myself that were hard. Like surprisingly, I had some comic book writers on that were independent comic book writers. And I was like, oh, this is gonna be great. This is gonna be a great interview. I'm gonna love it. They're gonna love me. And it was pulling teeth to talk. And that is,
was it just because they're writers and they're introverted kind of a deal?
Yes, but like I'm introverted. Like you wouldn't know by listening to a podcast that I'm introverted, but I'm totally like antisocial. Like in real life, like I hate people. Like it's just, they scare me. Like I don't want to talk. Like I kind of just want to do my own thing. But on the air, I feel extroverted, I guess. But yeah, most of the guests that I have on that I have an issue with are usually post interview. Like something happens where we have a falling out, because I try.
That's what happens.
Yeah, and I tend to think of everyone I interview as like a friend at that point. Like, because again, it's not an interview. It's more of a like we're having a conversation. If I'm asked, if it turns into an interview where questions are being answered, then great. But most of the time, everyone that I talk to, like I hope to have on again someday, and I hope to have like a free flowing relationship and collaborate with them more, and just have like a friendly experience throughout the rest of my podcasting career.
Yeah. So that actually one of our guests, we had a falling out with, and so me and that person, we're also going to do another podcast. And so they, for whatever reason, Jeff said something that was rude or insensitive or whatever. And this person felt so disrespected that they were like, pull all my episodes, pull all my likeness and everything. And at that point, we didn't do a waiver, which we'll make sure we send it to you.
Oh, man.
And for a while, we were doing them all audio. Like, we'll just have you repeat a script.
Yeah, but we just jumped right into this interview, which is great.
Yeah.
But I mean, out of all of these waivers, I think this one kind of goes unsaid.
I need to, so this is blowing my mind right now, because like I am probably the furthest thing from a professional when it comes to this. Like I just hop on and talk. So a waiver sounds like potentially an idea that would have saved me a huge headache earlier this year when I had a mental breakdown.
Right, because we came across this, and this person, like technically this is art. was Jeff's argument. Like, this is art. I
We've
should be
already
able to keep
recorded
it.
it.
I've
They've already
produced
agreed.
it. Yeah.
I've already put it up.
Yeah.
Like,
And they were just like, no, I want everything out, gone, nothing. And then
So
we
I
were
went
just
to
kind of
my,
like, what?
I mentioned the TBTL fan community. I go to them a lot for like advice on stuff like this because a lot of them are podcasters as well, and they're just smart, interesting people. And some of them were like, "Get rid of it. Start making everybody sign a waiver." And I was like, "Oh man, but it's so impersonal."
Yeah,
it's
he's like,
a prenup.
he was like, this is
gross.
yeah. Jeff hates that stuff, and I'm more like admin oriented type person.
And usually you can tell when somebody might flip. Like if I'd really thought about it with this particular individual, I would have dotted my I's or whatever.
Oh, I didn't think so. But
sometimes somebody flips and you just never expected it. But sometimes, I don't know.
Yeah, and like you know, like we err on the side of being positive and thinking the best of people and giving them the benefit of the doubt. So, you know, obviously when we go into an interview, we're not trying to have a falling out a couple months or a couple weeks later. You know, that's just not a thing.
Especially because I said to this person, like, look, I'm still editing. We could take out stuff that you're uncomfortable with. But, and then we had another guy. Oh man, this is, we had a rival in local podcasting. I won't get into the specifics, but we had a rival. And we go to a comedy show that this particular person was involved in a production type way. And he's like, "Hey man, I got a new job. You got to get rid of that episode with me on it." And I was like, "What? It's like a 2-parter, and like it's like I don't have all that many episodes. Like what's wrong with it?" And he's like, "Just get rid of it." And like that gave me a sour feeling ever since.
Yeah, because he was going through that person was going through background checks and things like that for their job, and they were thinking that it was maybe this episode that was getting them not hired.
Ooh.
You don't remember
say that directly to me.
No, I was right there. He only talked to you. I was right there.
Man, that's so silly. They said all kinds of crazy shit on their own podcast.
Yeah, Jeff probably was just traumatized. He just heard that and was just like, "Oh, okay." And I was just, that was the first time that I had. So this other person we had was also a local podcaster, and I was excited to meet them because they were kind of like the big shot in town. And so I was just thinking, oh, cool, like getting to know the podcasting community. And that was what he led with, or sorry, that's what they
this
led.
Individual.
Let's edit this. And that's what they led with. And I was just kind of like, oh my gosh, like this could be legal. I mean, this could be a whole thing. And I like to be, you know, clean and professional at all times, no matter what, you know, just to err on the side of CYA. Mm-hmm. And so it's like really exciting to me that you are totally cool and we were able to book you on our podcast episode for this month. And and then, you know, and we could bond about like, because we can bond over, you know, everything is awesome, but also it seems like we have like a similar vision because I was looking at your logo, and I kid you not, when I first started, Jeff didn't have a logo. He just had like a picture.
Yeah, I remember the picture of the cat.
Yeah, taco cats.
Yeah, or taco cats.
And I was like, we need logo, we need branding, we need t-shirts, we need, you know, magnets.
I can't do any of it.
Because that's my job. Like, that's what I do. And I understand, like, you know, branding. So I was just like, we had sketched out a couple ideas, and I think one of our visuals was like the very simple everything is, and then having awesome be kind of like big, like you have it. And so, you know, it's kind of cool. Like, it's kind of cool that it's not this weird rivalry, like territorial thing. And it's more, and which was what I was hoping for, was I was hoping like, hey, how awesome would it be if we just had a bunch of Everything is Awesome podcasts, and it could be like all over the United States.
Just franchise that shit.
Yeah, I mean, you could be the Philly, you know, chapter. We could be the Tacoma, Washington. We could be the Washington chapter. There could be one in every state.
We're the weirdo bookworms that talk about our mental illness. You're the nerdy guy with movies.
Yeah. And so I like, you know, I just feel like there is some similarities, and that's really cool that despite not knowing each other and being strangers, that we kind of have the same vision in some way. Like there's an underlying current that is very similar. And I just was curious. So when you talk about your podcast, I'm like, podcast? What's the podcast about? What do you say? I'm sure you've heard that.
I literally just kind of like how I described it earlier. It's like, well, it's just me sitting around talking. Like it's literally a conversation. I have a conversation with a new person every week. And you know, if I'm being more formal about it, like if it's with someone that's a fellow podcaster or it's like trying to book, like I like to book, like this year was big for conventions. Like we booked 2 conventions that we performed live at. So whenever
yeah, we actually have one coming up here in Seattle to PodCon.
Yeah, we got to get on that.
We get on that. That's like another thing.
We need to be seen. The world has to see our beauty.
Did you guys, where was PodCon last year? Was it in Seattle last year too?
It's Seattle, yeah. As far as all I know is Travis McElroy had something to do with it.
And Jen
And
Frater?
by the time I had heard about it, everything was booked. So, like, we were on the outside.
It seems like they were last minute this year.
Yeah, I just heard about it.
I think they just formally announced it.
Right. But is it all fully scheduled?
I have no idea.
No, I think they're raising money through Kickstarter or Indiegogo or something.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe we can get in there this year.
Yeah, well, we could talk to Jen. That was the person that...
Jen Freeman she has a great podcast. She's from Olympia. What is it called? I never saw that.
Mm-hmm.
It's good.
Yeah,
listen to it.
I have every time I saw so this is probably, you know, in the 130s for me episode wise. So I probably have at least 130 plus recommendations of podcasts I should be listening to.
Yeah, there's a section in our show that we do shout outs.
Yeah, I was so grateful to all the other podcasters that helped me get started that I just decided at the end of every show I'd go around the table and pitch 1 or 2 episodes per person. And it's a cool segment.
Let me ask you guys about your Everything is Awesome, because there's literally no structure to my show. Like there is, as you guys have witnessed, like we've started recording right away because of me. Like that was all on me because there was literally no pre-conversation to say, this is how we're going to do the crossover. This is how I record. This is how you record. I literally hop right into it and go. And at some point the show will be the show and at some point it won't. And there's no segment. Like, now I do live shows and there's usually a lot more structure to that. Still no research, but more structure.
Yeah, we've done a couple live shows.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, man, I have questions. So I want to start with,
wait, before we get into that, there was one thing. Can I circle back?
Yeah.
You said you had a falling out with a guest.
Mm-hmm.
Both of our shows, just because of the name, and I think our characters were kind of peace and love and like celebrate. So, like, what happens when you have a big drop like that? How does that feel? How does that affect your sense of yourself and your podcast?
So I try to live life the Kevin Smith way. And he's like Mr. Positive and I try, that's why I'm so positive. That's why, like, even down to like, just like him, like down to crappy movies, I try to find the good in it. Sometimes you can't, like with Batman versus Superman, there's no positive in that, but I try to be the guy that's like, you know, and this is why I don't like the Reddit podcasting community, because they're all about like, why would you do this? Like, why would you do a show with you just sitting around talking with your best friend? There's a million of those shows. And I'm like, why not? Like, they're my favorite shows. I want to listen to 2 people talking like they're best friends.
Yeah, that's TBTL. That's, what are some other ones?
There is a good, and they don't do it anymore. And damn, what was it? It was my worst day or worst day of my life or something like that. And it was just like these 2 friends sitting around talking about like crappy things that happened to them during the week. But it was at the heart of it was just 2 best friends talking. And like, and it goes back to me being like my first podcast being Smodcast. Like it was just 2 best friends talking. And ultimately that's where I am today with Everything is Awesome. It's me talking to new like I call them super friends, like all my new super friends. Every week it's a new super friend that I'm sitting around talking to.
Cool.
But like, so something like that happened with my guest in that falling out. Now, it was more than just like it wasn't necessarily even had anything to do with Everything is Awesome. It was about the network that I was running that at this point, Everything is Awesome is on. As far as when this is airing, when we're recording it, I'm actually part of another network for another couple days. But I'm finally, bringing that podcast back to like the network I'm running. And there was a falling out with, and it wasn't even anything to do with podcasting. It had something to do, we were both writing for another website.
It was about a girl, wasn't it? It was about a girl.
If that girl is DC Comics, then absolutely.
Oh shit.
Oh,
She's a feisty one, I hear.
Yeah, like we were both writing for this website that was a comic book review website and whatnot, and like it. I, without getting into many details, it was just this crazy thing that like I had no idea, like the jealousy behind me writing for the site that was there, and it blew up into this thing, and I was like, I'm just, you know what, professionally we're done, like, because he crossed the line that I don't think is forgivable, and I guess I crossed the line that he didn't think was forgivable. I was like, we're just done, and if it had been as simple as a clean cut, it would have been great, but it was I'm 34 now. Like I turned 34 this month. So at the time I was 33. Like I don't do like high school stuff anymore. Like I have kids and whatnot. And this person was 10 years my senior. Like, so like the fact that I was living this high school drama through email and whatnot. And it was like having and I think everyone kind of suffers from some level of depression. I find it hard to believe that.
That's fair.
I find it hard to believe that someone like goes throughout their entire life without having it. And I think it's just everyone deals with it at different levels, and they have their own coping mechanisms. And
yes,
like I know people that take medicine for it, and it's great. Like if you need to take medicine, you need to sit down and talk to somebody. I know someone that has to go and see someone every week or every month or whatever their schedule is, and like that's all great. And I'm happy that stuff exists and whatnot. For me, like I know that I've never been at that level. Like usually, like. About 10 years ago, I guess more than 10 years ago, it was wrestling. Like I would just hop in the ring and wrestle, and that's how I dealt with my depression. I just was being, and what that turned into was being creative is how I cope. But like this guest literally like they were like so manipulative that they were able to like kind of break me to like not want to create. Like in 2018 I was very slow to put out episodes, and a lot, to be fair, the end of 2017 was the 1 year anniversary of my uncle passing away from cancer, and it's also his birthday and Thanksgiving and Chris, like all this stuff happens like in a 4 week span of that. Like I kind of just like, I know that I knew I was going to get sad, and this year I'm trying to kind of preempt that by not being sad, or using creativity to get through that sadness. But so I was just kind of getting over that when all this other crap happened with the guest. And like, I was done. Like I almost, and like I had a bad live show at the end of January because of different factors, but some of it was because of what I was going through with this. So I almost threw in the towel for live shows. I almost threw in the towel for podcasting. I was like, I'm just done. Like, what's the fucking point?
Yeah,
and so that's how that particular one, and honestly,
what brought you back?
So one of the things was what I wanted to do with the show live, and that was before I really started feeling that way. We had done episode 100 that you guys were just listening to before we started recording with Jeff Stormer, and I was like, I really love the idea of not doing my late night talk show style of live shows. Like I think that's the issue. Like, we just had this live show in January that didn't go off the way, like every other show that I put on the card performed top notch. My sponsor that was supposed to help promote was garbage, and I felt like garbage as far as how I performed. So I was like, and it took me a couple of weeks for me to say, you know what, that episode 100, there was something special about that episode. And I was like, I want to do more conventions and whatnot. So it was while kind of still figuring out like how to get through dealing with this guest. I was like, well, let me see what happens when I apply for a convention. And I applied for the Greater Philadelphia Comic Con, which is a small little convention in Oaks, PA, just outside of Philly. And it was my first time ever being a guest at an attendee at the con, let alone a guest at that con. And I found out a week beforehand that we were accepted, but that's literally what jump started me again. Like I was nice. Being accepted to that con, and then within a week or two of that, being accepted to Wizard World Philly to do our panel there. Like that back-to-back acceptance, like kind of jump started me into doing it again. And what held me back up until I'd say July 1st, as far as like putting the shows out in a timely fashion, was just the pile of work I had to do to get there. So like I had maybe like, I don't know, 15 episodes recorded, and also needed to record another 15 episodes to catch up. Like I'm a numbers guy. I like to have, all right, July 1st is supposed to be the episode 127. So I need to be at 127. So I and it's something that only podcasters care about. It's something that probably only I care about.
Oh my God. I can't tell you how angsty I felt when a girlfriend I was with at one point said, like, you don't have to put one out every week. And I was like, what? You don't understand me.
No.
Luckily, I've calmed down a little bit.
I'm kind of the same way. What I do now is I try to make up for it if I miss a week. Is I like the next week I'll put 2 out or something like that, because I still need to have at least 52 episodes a year. Like it's something that's just wired in my head that I need to do, and it's supposed to be easier because I don't have to rely on a guest host, so I don't need to take holidays off now.
Oh, okay. There's another thing you put on your back. But like, if we can, I really want to get into this because I know there are podcasters and other artists out there who get a big setback and they feel like shit and it's all on them and they're like, I shouldn't do this anymore.
If it makes it feel any better, we kind of had our own couple setbacks this year.
Like when we stopped doing ours every week because of school, or if we had like personal problems. I mean, we're a couple, so like that shit happens. And then just this one particular issue that we talked about earlier, like coming back from that, was it just being accepted by these two cons, or was there something about the people that were organizing them? Was it something about the people that came out to the live show?
It was the acceptance of being able to do the panel at the con, because it was a way for me to think about how I was going to do a live show differently. Mainly the live shows I do tend to be in the late night talk show format. So it will be me, and I'll bring my best friend in as my like Ed McMahon, and we'll do a quick little monologue, and we'll do a bit in the beginning, and then we'll have a guest come out, and then a musician or a comedian come out at the end and kind of wrap things up in about 55 minutes.
That's kind of how we did it for ours.
Yeah. And I want to talk. I'll answer your question. I want to talk to you about your live show, because live shows interest me big time. But yeah, so it was, all right, well, the challenge I had for episode 100 was, I wanted episode 100 to be special because it was 100. I wanted it to be different because it was 100. Episode 25, I interviewed Batman, aka I sat in a car by myself, going back and forth, talking to myself as Batman. So when milestone episodes are my opportunity to have fun with the show. And I think everyone should be doing it. Like, I absolutely think any podcaster that's out there should take these opportunities when they can to switch it up, and stay true to your brand, but switch it up to have fun. Because like at the end of the day, you're kind of doing it for yourself.
We did that for our episode 100 too.
Yeah, that guy I mentioned that where she
my
was
first guest was
Ezra.
our 100th episode guest, and then we went through.
We brought him in, and I
outtakes.
played him all these clips from that episode that we like talked about what had happened.
Nice,
Since then.
yeah.
It was great.
Yeah. So yeah, I totally get what you're saying. But did you want to answer your question or?
Yeah. So yeah. live shows. So how do you guys do? Like, how do you differentiate the live show? Because I feel like that's an important thing from your regular recorded show.
Let's see. Did we ever even like talk about this is how we're going to do it, or did you just come along with me and I did it the way I'd done it before?
I think you just did it the way I did it, and I was just kind of like, hey, you know, for the sake of efficiency, can we just have it a certain way consistently? And so that's when we kind of brought in the framework of, we already had a framework, but we kind of brought in the framework of, we're going to talk about the week, and then we're going to talk about something else, and then we're going to go into the interview with the guests.
Yeah.
And we haven't really been following that at all. But
for these live shows, it was basically, I invited people to my house for a comedy show.
Yeah.
And then I kind of round robin brought the comedians in and out.
We all
talk show style.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just as many mics as we had, that's how many people were on stage at once or whatever. And on stage, my basement.
So when you do your live shows, have they all been at your house?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, my first one was my freedom party, quote unquote. Okay. It was when my divorce went final back in 2014. So that, or 2015. So that was a big to do. Like I had musicians and the whole thing. I ended up, one comedian went on way too long, as comedians tend to do. I found out it was the first time I ever organized a comedy show, but I had to scrub like one of the musicians, and luckily he was totally cool about it. But man, putting on a live show, like in a venue, like you either have to have your own fans fill that place, or you have to be really, really good at putting on a show. And I don't know if I was or not. You'd have to ask the people that were there.
Well, and that's how, so that interests me, because I've never like even thought to do like kind of that like basement show. I mean, I don't think I have the space to do something like that where I'm at. But like we've always, like, I mean, every live show I've ever done, which the first one was in 2007, we emceed an event at a bar, by just kind of like, there would be bands playing, and then in between the bands, we would just do a little silly bit, hand out t-shirts, and then introduce the next band. And which was a lot of fun, but not really what I wanted to do in live podcasting, which again in 2007, no one was really doing that. So I wanted to do what all live podcasters do now, and that's basically do a version of their show on stage. And I think it's, and you know what, here's like my advice as far as like doing a live show in a venue, and you guys can take it or leave it, but is to have a live element that is special to the crowd that's there. So what I do is we sometimes try to play a game that may suck for my listening audience at home, but these are episodes that don't air too often, and I try to make it all, sound good audible as well as visual for the live audience. But then also like the first guest, I try to pick someone that is going to have something interesting to do as well. So like the first live show we did with Everything Is Awesome, I had one of my friends who was a fitness guy come in. He had me and my co-host do a push-up contest against each other, had us do like an ab roller in the audience and whatnot. And it was just a fun, silly thing to do to get the audience like visually involved with the show.
I like that. Yeah.
And the other advice I give for live shows is think about how many people would sit around. And I mean, you guys have done it in your house, so maybe this is a bad example, but think about how many people in your house would actually sit around and listen to you talk about the bullshit that you talk about, right? Like, for me, nobody wants in my house wants to sit around and listen to me talk. So the fact that like when I go to do a live show, if literally nobody shows up, like whatever, like it's okay, because I'm getting a cool experience recording my show in a different kind of venue. So
absolutely. That's why I would make it a show after, or I mean, it was usually on a special event like my birthday.
Okay.
Yeah. So like the first one that I did was probably like the third episode in for Everything Is Awesome. Is we just did the housewarming party, the 420-ish party.
I mean, honestly, it was really just hijacking our party guests for an hour.
So it was kind of cool though, and I'm really glad that was my first time doing it, because there was an audience. So our guests were the audience members, and it felt like it was like a nighttime show.
Yeah.
You know, like a TV show. Just that's what kind of, you know, you and I were the hosts, and we were just smoking and drinking and like had comedians, and so they all kind of were good comedians and were able to keep the show going. And then it was cool to hear like live audience feedback too.
Yeah.
Like them laughing and
that's
seeing
one
them
thing
smile.
that if we do it again, I would like to incorporate more, because one of my favorite pods, My Favorite Murder, they started doing their segment where they have somebody on at the end. So the audience, like the whole time, is feeling like, I hope it's me or my friend or whatever who has a good story. And then that person gets to come on, tell their story. Everybody claps. They're like, yay, look at this audience member rules. And then like the audience feels good or whatever. I think that we could incorporate something like that.
I just started listening to My Favorite Murder a couple months ago because it's the only podcast my fiance listens to. I was like, oh my God, you're listening to a podcast? Like, I want to listen to it too so we can talk about it. And so I'm in the process of binging that. But I think you guys should. I think everyone that does a podcast should take the step of doing one in a venue. Like if you can find space to do it,
we should.
It's you might get like, I don't know. I find it hard to believe that you're not going to get anybody in there because typically, like now for me, you know, I live in the suburbs of Philly, so a lot of my friends and family don't actually come. Like, so the people that come and watch my show, like, are honestly there to see a podcast. So it is a weird feeling, but it's usually a small crowd. Like the biggest crowd we had was at Wizard World. We had like 75 people there, but that's not the norm. The norm is probably anywhere from 10 to 20 people. I've literally had nobody, but that was more of like we weren't doing the normal thing anyway. The normal thing I've had, the least amount I've had was my guest wife was in the audience. So that was also.
Yeah, there's something so fun. Like as a performer, like I play music or whatever, like when there's no one there, but the sound guy and like the bartender.
Well,
the pressure is way lower, but then also if you're really good, they'll start like calling their friends and family and be like, "You got to see this guy."
Yeah, and we had the venue that we were at for that show where it was just my guest wife. It was my fault because I didn't promote. It was literally that show was booked before things went bad with my uncle, but took place 2 weeks after he passed away. So like I did zero promotion for it. Until like the week off, I was like, guys, by the way, doing this thing. And like, so no one came to it, which expected. It was in the city. It was a drive for all my local friends and whatnot. But the venue was broadcasting it on their Facebook page. And I know we had like I think a couple hundred views on that. Like, I'm sure they were in and out. I'm sure it wasn't consistent. But
yeah, we've done that. We've done Facebook Live where we'll just do the warm up talk.
Yeah, let's talk about Facebook streaming.
Live.
Oh, you're talking my game because that's. I mean, I kind of talked about it.
Yeah, have you had any success there?
Well, not recently, because I don't do it now. Like I don't do live streaming, and it's something that I want to look into doing again, and I think that's something I'll look into once I set up my studio. But I brought it up earlier. Was Stickcam was my live streaming experience, and varying degrees of success there. Like the main show that I did for me, Happy Hour, we probably had a couple thousand with that viewed the show within the hour, and then consistently was probably like around 50 to 100 people were consistently in that room. Stabcast, the show that I was contracted for, I think while I was part of that show, it never went down below 2 hours, and that was similar numbers, like about that was probably about 10,000 people in the 2 hours that viewed the show in and out, and it was what's that?
You're coming in and out, so we're missing all these interesting numbers.
My God.
Maybe we should take a break.
Okay.
Yeah, let's take a quick break and reset our Zencaster, and then we'll get back on the call. How's that sound?
That sounds great. So we'll do that now. Thank you to Jeff and KC from the Other Everything is Awesome podcast for being on the show. If you want to listen to part 2, it drops on August 22nd, but it is available on patreon.com/thatentertains right now. All you have to do is go there and subscribe. and you get early access, exclusive content, and much, much more. Check out all our rewards, all our goals. We really want to make the podcasting space better than it already is. We know it can be more welcoming. We know it can be more inclusive. And the whole point of the network is to give a platform to unique voices and be inclusive to the community. And I'm so excited for the network growing. We'll have more news on that, maybe not in part 2, but maybe in episode 135. We'll have more episode about our network possibly expanding even further. So yet again, thank you to Jeff and KC for being on the show. If you're looking for other podcasts to listen to, may I recommend The Ladies Who Rant with Ami Khan and Andrea Rutherford. Ami and Andrea sit down and they talk about today's issues from a woman's perspective, rant along the way, laugh along the way, cry along the way. And it's such a great show. I'm so proud to have that on my network. I'm really excited to see what they develop for their Patreon exclusive stuff that you can find at patreon.com/thatentertains. And be sure you check out The Ladies Who Rant on thatentertains.com/network. I mentioned earlier that After Party of One will be coming to the That's Entertainment Podcast Network. It's a brand new show that is in the vein of an after show where we sit down and we talk about Party of One podcast. It's going to be a monthly show to start. We're going to sit down every month and talk about the previous month's worth of shows. And I am super, super excited to be bringing that to you. October 1st, we're going to be recording on around the 27th of September, and it's going to air on October 1st for the general audience, and I'm going to try to get it dropped on the 28th or 29th for our Patreon subscribers. It is going to be such a fun show. Jeff's a great storyteller, and I want to be able to sit down and break down each episode with guests from within the tabletop community, which is literally anybody who is a fan of Party of One, a fan of role-playing games, a fan of good storytelling, a fan of being a player, a fan of being a game master. If you count yourself in that world of tabletop, which I truly believe anyone can say that they are, you are 100% on board for listening to this breakdown. Hopefully we're going to have quick little interview snippets from designers as well, from the games that Jeff features on his show for that month. But we are still developing the show, obviously, because we haven't recorded yet. So, I'm just super excited. Make sure you check that out. And you can go to AfterShowPod, at AfterShowPod on Twitter, to get more information about the show as it drops. Follow us there to hear me go on and on about Party of One and stuff like that. We like to end Everything is Awesome with a call to action. Super friends, there are a lot of terrible things happening right now, and it can feel like you can't do anything to help, but you can. It takes people like us to make a difference, and one of the easiest and most important ways to take action is to call your representatives about issues that are important to you. And I've been listening to this great new Philadelphia-based podcast called My Gay Agenda. And even though I consider myself an ally, listening to that podcast has been very eye-opening and enlightening, and it makes me realize I can do more for the LGBTQ plus community. And my call to action this week is to urge you to contact your representatives about the census count for our LGBTQ plus population. Every 10 years, the United States Census provides policymakers with essential information about the demographics that make up our nation. Census counts inform everything from allocation of federal funding to states to enforcement of anti-discrimination laws like the Fair Housing Act. Additionally, public health and social science researchers use census data to understand communities' unique needs. Questions about gender identity and sexual orientations have never been included in the census, making it hard for policymakers to understand how disparities in employment, housing, and other arenas affect LGBTQ plus communities. People in this community, especially those of color, still face discrimination and abuse. Congress must reject the Census Bureau's attempt to erase LGBTQ plus people from policymaking considerations and ensure the census includes questions about gender identity and sexual orientation. When I call my reps, I use a site called 5calls.org. That's the number 5calls.org. There, you'll find issue summaries of issues that are important to you, contact info for your representatives, and a script to read while you're on the phone to make sure your message gets across. Calling is quick, easy, and is one of the most important ways to have your voice heard. It can make a tremendous difference. Let your voice be heard. Thank you to our supporters on patreon.com/thatentertains. If you want to support us in a non-monetary way, word-of-mouth recommendations and 5-star rating reviews on iTunes are the best way to spread the good word of awesome. You can find us on @RealAwesomePod on Facebook.com and Twitter. You can also find us on Instagram @AwesomePodcast, and we're available on AwesomePodcast.com and, of course, thatentertains.com/network. You can get more news about this show at AwesomePodcast.com and thatentertains.com, but also on my personal Twitter @ThatNerdyKev is where I do a lot of things. If you're interested in ad rates, live appearances, help with your podcast, or having a question or comment, email us at awesome@crudehammerstudios.com. Everything is Awesome is a production of That Entertains Podcast Network in association with Crude Humor Studios. Crude Humor Studios is a Philadelphia-based production company specializing in audio. You can find more information at crudehumorstudios.com. Thanks for listening, super friends. We've been awesome.
That's Entertainment Podcast Network. Entertainment and culture. Artist-owned, fan-supported.